Hello everyone, KV here, and welcome back to another one of these KV's Chat Corner videos. I know there hasn't been any gameplay content yet, but it's coming. I know it's been almost a month since we've done one of these Chat Corner videos, so I figured I really wanted to figure out like a kind of a topic to go with. So what I did this time is I grabbed my good friend Anketh and grabbed him by his ear and said, "Hey, I'm gonna sit you down and we're gonna talk about something." And so we're going to talk about Fire Emblem, because there was a recent game that just came out, Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia, and just kind of discuss the whole Fire Emblem series and kind of its impact on us and what we enjoy about it and whatnot. So, hello, Ankith, thank you for joining me.
Hey KV, how's it going?
It is going all right. It's going all right. I know you're still playing Fates, but I started the new Fire Emblem game, and I'm just kind of like, I really like this.
Yeah, I'm a little behind the times still. I'm hoping to get caught up on that soon, but we'll see.
Don't worry, Fates is it's a little overabundant in some regard. It's not awful. It's just not. I wouldn't. Well, we can get into kind of the more opinions on that later. But yeah, no, don't worry. Fates is a stupidly giant game.
All right then.
So just starting off, like when you think about like Fire Emblem, because I mean, like, gosh, we've had what, like, I guess 6, 7 games now out here in the West, because initially it was only in Japan for the first 6, and we got the first one over here in 2003 with the Elliewood game.
Yeah, that was what, Fire Emblem 6 technically?
7 technically. Blazing
7.
Blade would have been 7. Um, but yeah, but like what, like, I know my own story, but I'm just kind of curious, like, where did you first hear of Fire Emblem, and how did you kind of get into this series?
Oh, well, that was a long time ago. Memories of that are a bit hazy at this point. Um, but I was introduced to it by a cousin of mine. I was visiting him, stayed away, and he just so happened to have a copy of Fire Emblem, which was the first one released here in the United States, was the Blazing Blade.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd already beaten it, so he told me I could make a brand new file and play through it. I got about halfway through the game before I left and decided I had to pick it up over here, so I bought it when I got back. And since
Wait,
then,
wait,
I've been
wait.
playing it once they come out.
You got halfway through it? How long were you there for?
About a week, I think.
Oh, okay. If you're gonna say like you're only there for like a day or two, I was just gonna be like, what were you doing?
I mean, they did come through relatively fast. I likely would have gotten farther if I hadn't been busy playing a smorgasbord of other games as well.
Fair
Plus,
enough. Fair enough.
actually socializing.
Yep. I don't do a lot of that these days myself, so that's um for me it was the most obvious for most people. Martha and Roy's inclusion in Super Smash Bros. Melee was my first kind of introduction to the series as a whole. No idea what the heck it was, but there's these two Japanese talking guys with swords. And eventually we got a game over here, and it was related to one of the Japanese guys talking of swords, and finding out later that Roy in Melee, technically, by all accounts, was added in for no reason other than to promote the series, because his game had not been released yet when Melee initially came back out, is kind of hilarious in hindsight, since we have never actually gotten Roy's game. We eventually got a remake of Marth's game, but we never got, we still have not received Roy's game over here, which is really hilarious because people love Roy in the States, but only in Smash. The people don't seem to care much about him in the actual Fire Emblem series, which I find really funny. But yeah, I also played the very first one because I was kind of interested, because I was like, I don't know what's going on here, so I'm interested, and I got it, and it was alright. Everybody died, but I beat it. So, I mean, take your poison. I beat the game. I beat the game by sacrificing everybody to win, but I beat it.
Did you have like a favorite character who you just couldn't sacrifice? Did you ever restart the
No,
game?
they all died. They all died. They all died. Only Hector, Lynn, and Elliewood lived. I mean, some characters only get mortally wounded and they don't actually die. But yeah,
We all know what really happens.
so The first time playing through it, getting to that when it shows the whole like what happened to them after the war type thing, reading died in chapter 22, died in chapter 28, died in chapter 17. I'm just like, oh, well then, this is depressing as hell.
Yeah, I think the first time I played through that game, I had a number of deaths as well. It wasn't a huge number, but it was something like half a dozen, about 6 or 7 of them.
I
And
guess
they,
if I have anything to be proud about, is no one can beat my death number for how many characters I got killed off.
well, I mean, to be fair, toward the end of that game, you really don't need more than 2 or 3 characters. They kind of give you all the help you need at the end of the game.
Which ones, though? Because I probably got them killed off because I'm really terrible.
Well, as long as you can get through that final chapter, once they give you Archsage Athos, you're basically in the clear.
Yeah, I got him. I let the dragon beat the crap out of him because Elliewood sucked. So I needed something to stay there as a meat shield for Elliewood.
Hey, well, whatever gets it done, I guess.
Actually, my fondest memory of that particular game is, I think it's chapter 28. It's when the map theme changes, because the map theme had been pretty standard throughout, but it becomes this really like foreboding theme that is the main map theme for the rest of the game, excluding the final chapter. And you either fight Lloyd or Linus of the Black Fang, depending on whoever you fought in chapter 23. It's the other side. That chapter's awful. That chapter is awful. It's reinforcements the chapter, and if you suck at the game, you're not gonna have a fun time. It was, oh god, that chapter.
It's been so long since I've played it, I couldn't even think about where that game caused me difficulty. I remember though, I was always really upset because every time I would go through the game and I would play through it, and maybe you can know the guy's name. Who's the dark mage that you can recruit going through there?
I think his name starts with a C. I know.
C or a K.
Canis?
That sounds right.
The guy with the monocle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, purple hair monocle. Okay, yeah, I remember that dark guy. He died right away from me. But
see, that's the thing. I don't remember that guy because I played through the game 3 separate times, and every single playthrough, I never found him. I have no idea where he is in that game or how people found him. So people would be talking about how they've got this awesome dark mage, and he just completely kills everything on the map, and he's amazing. And I'm like, I don't know, what are you guys talking about? Are you trying to pull a fast one on me, or?
Well, he's only amazing if you're actually good at the game. Because, he died instantly for me, but whatever. I might be remembering that incorrectly, too, because I swear I made him into a druid at some point, but I don't know. But, despite everything, I kept going back to it, because I felt like I should get better at this. And, I think after you beat the game, it unlocks hard mode and Hector mode. I did Hector mode, and I went, why wasn't the game about Hector to begin with? Hector's a much more fun main character, and he doesn't die instantly, like Elliewood did. So, yay! Oh, I gotta have Elliewood come with me anyway. Well, yay, Hector anyway. And I actually kind of like that, because in playing through that, you get more story beats that you didn't get in Elliewood's story, because it's very centric on him, and of course there's the whole Lynn prologue bits of that too, and I like that as well. But I kind of like that because it kept weaving this narrative together that was actually pretty tight. I really liked the entire overall story of that game, and to later learn that that was essentially made as a prequel to Roy's game, it was actually kind of interesting, because that means that I haven't played Roy's game, so I have no idea, but they probably tried really hard to actually kind of integrate that into Roy's story, and the only thing I can think of is the very last cutscene of the entire game actually is basically the prologue to Roy's game, which is kind of interesting in that regard, though also kind of sad, because based on the interactions you have with that character at the end during your journey through the game kind of contradicts that ending, so I kind of felt really bad.
Yeah, I don't know. It's awkward.
Yeah, I mean, I guess because he's already the villain, I guess someone would, well, let's make him sympathetic a little bit, because, he's just a kid when you meet him as Elliewood, and then it's just like, nope, he's this crazy jerk face guy. Oh well.
I would tend to agree with you about Hector being a more enjoyable main character. I get into a lot of trouble because I disagree with people about his usefulness as a unit. Maybe it's just because I have a general bias against armored and armored type units in general, but he
But
never.
Brom!
I know, but Braum. But he just never really appealed to me in the same way that Eliwood did. Primarily because Eliwood's speed was a little bit better, and getting those double attacks just felt so satisfying. Even if
And
you
Eliwood does
friend-
become a mounted. Eliwood does become a mounted unit, which does open up a lot of movement capabilities. It's just he's super squishy for me, and the fact that he dies, game over, just went because that's probably that's probably how my first playthrough went. Essentially, is I just went Eliwood can't die. You can die though. That's fine. So yeah, so I guess that was the first game that we both played. But so, what was the next game that you would have played then in the series?
Well, I played the next one at that point. I played the Sacred Stones.
Okay, because I actually skipped that one. I didn't play that one at all. It just something about it just didn't appeal to me. But I keep hearing it's actually really good.
It was a very good game. They tried a relatively new thing. They added that open world map so you could walk around and you could have random encounters, which was at times amazing, and at times it felt a little bit stressful. Because they get in your way, and
Okay.
you're traveling from place to place, and then suddenly a monster pops up and you can't get past him. He's like those delightful music box enemies from Super Mario Bros. Like, oh no, why'd you have to come this way? Now I got to spend my time fighting you instead of doing what I really want to do.
But it's good experience, right?
It gives you an opportunity to grind for experience, so you don't have the problem you had in the Blazing Blade, which was unless you go arena farm, you have
Which
no
you
chance
could
to
also
catch
die
up.
from that as well, as I learned the hard way.
Oh yes, you put many hours into the arena, and then the arena kills you, and then there went your hours. But it's nice as a catch-up mechanic. But on the other hand, the rewards they gave you for doing that were generally relatively small as far as gold values went. So if you spent too much doing that, you suddenly found yourself with a bunch of broken weapons and no real way to re-equip your army.
Okay, so that's kind of how it fixed itself, because we'll get to it later, but recent games have gotten rid of weapon durability, and that Sacred Stones having weapon durability, but also being allowed to grind, I think is a good kind of compromise, because that way you can grind to get stronger, but there's still the caveat of if you don't have enough money to get weapons again, then you're kind of screwed.
Right. Generally, you would spend a little bit of time grinding between each one, but I think they did a relatively good job with the pacing. Again, it's been a while since I played it, but I remember
Okay.
not having to stop and grind, but getting to stop and grind, which felt really nice.
So then, since I'm completely unfamiliar with it, how would you? I know the game has two main characters, Ephraim and Erica. How would you say that they are as kind of? How would they stack up against Lynn, Hector, and Eliwood from Blazing Blade as far as protagonists?
Hmm. They've got their own little dynamic going on. I would say they're fine protagonists, but um, in the memory of hindsight, looking backwards, there was nothing about them that really stuck out at me and made me say, "Gosh, these characters! I love these characters. They're the best."
Okay.
Um,
Was there something about Eliwood or Hector, or I guess Eliwood technically, based on what you're saying, that stuck out to you a little bit more?
in a manner of speaking, they had very defined personalities. They interacted with each other in a way that was, for lack of a better phrasing, it just felt more unique.
Okay.
And they each brought their own separate, distinct backgrounds to the game. Like you were saying, there was that distinction between playing the Eliwood game and playing the Hector game,
Mm-hmm.
and it felt like a complete different feel. With Erika and Ephraim, they were basically the same character. They had the exact same backstory. They just took different paths through the game,
Okay.
and so it made them feel a little bit, a little repetitive.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, because I guess in that regard, I might have not as enjoyed it as much then, because the next Fire Emblem game I would have played then was Path of Radiance, and I like Ike. I don't care. I think Ike is one of the best protagonists in the entire franchise. I don't care. Mic drop. People are gonna burn me for saying that, but I think he's great in both games. I think that's a good clarification because people like to get pissed about him in the second game for some reason, and I don't really understand why, but I like Ike, and I really enjoyed both the Tellius games a lot.
I would agree with you. I'm super biased on this regard. I own both versions of those games still, and as you well know, I've played through them both way too many times.
Oh come on, we did a combined playthrough together in college with those two games.
Yeah, yeah. Then I played through it again several times beyond that. Um, I got somebody else to do a playthrough of it. I wasn't. It wasn't a co-op run through, but I played it through with someone else again, and I've probably beat it at least three more times besides that. I want to say even more, depending on which game we're talking about in the series.
Okay, yeah, and I guess for me, like, that really, I got back into it because, I mean, I would replay the Blazing Blade on and off a little bit because I was kind of skeptical, but I still felt like I was really bad at the type of game, which is probably what turned me off from Sacred Stones to begin with, because I was like, well, I really sucked at the previous game. I don't think I should waste my time here. And something about Path of Radiance just kind of drew me to it, and I guess I would actually pin it on the fact that Ike is not a lord. Every main character in almost every Fire Emblem game is descendant or part of a royalty or nobility line. And I think the idea that Ike was basically now an outsider coming in was to me, was a much more fun angle from a story perspective.
In general, I would say I agree with you on that. It's kind of that same appeal I feel like people had originally playing the first game with Lynn versus Hector and Elliewood.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Lynn's got more going on in the background you learn about later in the game, but at the beginning, she's
She
just
didn't know
some
about it.
random
She didn't know
person from
about
the
it, yeah.
planets. And it's kind of that same thing with Ike. He's this random mercenary from out of nowhere who suddenly finds himself thrust into the main course of events and makes the best of it.
And he does have a relationship to nobility in some regard, but it's not because he's a forgotten prince or something like that. It's just because his dad has some ties to it. A lot of it is him kind of picking up his dad's baggage, which is kind of funny and hilarious because I think as both games go on, it's Ike picks up everyone's messes and just gets more frustrated about it.
Well, it was an interesting turning point because you still had the royalty with you driving the storyline, but you weren't them.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, especially in the first game, Path of Radiance. I think that was kind of a cool prospect to it because it also brought in or started to kind of hint at this whole dichotomy of this is why we haven't ever done this before, because then the action ability lines kind of go, what, this guy can't be blah 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 blah, you can't let him do that, and it's like, well, who cares, I'm queen now, so whatever.
Yeah,
And I like just how both those games are just kind of structured. Like, they clearly knew they were going to be making a two-parter thing, because the Path of Radiance ends off on a happy note, but it gives you a hint of, hey, the story's not over yet.
yeah. I feel like it's possible that they could have ended it with relative ease on Path of Radiance, but the door was definitely left open. There was still a lot left to explore. Um, Having said that, it is kind of interesting that as you go from Path of Radiance into Radiant Dawn, you start off Radiant Dawn kind of where you would expect, having left off from Path of Radiance. You've got this rebellion going on. You've got um, this difficulty integrating the cultures and the various races in the series there. And then toward the end of that game, it kind of takes off on a completely different tangent that you would have never expected coming out of it in the first one.
Ah, okay, yeah. If going from Path of Radiance, yeah, because I feel like in Radiant Dawn they do kind of establish the end game that's going to happen as you're going through it. I feel a lot of people think that the fourth act of Radiant Dawn comes out of nowhere, and I feel like there's enough hints at it of what's going to happen that it's kind of like, no, there's enough information here that you can kind of see what's going on.
Well, if nothing else, I mean, I wouldn't put it past game developers to have done it in the past, and Fire Emblem in particular. But you spend all these times raising units from multiple different armies just to throw them away, and then not to come back to them all would just be an odd design choice.
Yeah. And I guess go back to the beginning of Radiant Dawn. I do actually really like how it starts off because it basically kind of goes 3 years later, everything should be fine, right? Because we had happily ever after in the last game. Nope. Here's what all the problems are, and it's kind of like I actually really like that because if you think of it, not to be like awful to history, but if you think of like the whole concept of what happened in World War I, and then everyone thought everything was okay. That's not really the case, and that's how we ended up with World War II. We kind of had that night. That kind of I really like that dynamic of it because things don't just end clean cut and dry as people like to think them. That's why I really liked how Radiant Dawn began, and I honestly really liked that we started with these new characters in Radiant Dawn that were this new rebellion, and it made sense from their perspective because from our perspective, playing Path of Radiance, from all we know, everyone who lives in this country is an asshole. So why should we be nice to any of them? And then kind of going the minute just starting off like boom, nope, you're playing as characters from this country and they hate everything that's happening right now because of the events of the previous game is like, oh, actually this makes logical sense. And while the means as to how they work it into the game are a little iffy, I do like the fact that eventually you have your two armies that you've raised up battling each other in the story.
Yeah, it's really cool, I think, how you can have in that game two completely different sides and perspectives, and how they can be directly at odds with each other,
Mm-hmm.
and neither one of them is blatantly wrong, and you can empathize with both of them.
And like that's what I really liked because I think of like that's the detail of it. And I guess that's why people don't like the ending of it because they kind of just go, let's put our differences aside to take care of the big bad. But I feel like at that kind of point, I would do that too. So I don't know. I the ending I think kind of revels itself up, and I think a lot of characters get the closure that they need for the events. And I actually really enjoy what they did with Ike at the end of the game because I think that was the perfect way to just kind of go, yeah, whatever, I'm done with this. Bye.
Yeah, I don't know. Like on the one hand, it was satisfying to bring it to a conclusion in that way. You get the Fire Emblem arc, um, the namesake of the game, out of the way. But there are just a bunch of unanswered questions, and that same unrest that started off the game really doesn't get terribly well resolved at the end. There's nothing to say that it's not going to immediately spark back up necessarily. So I feel like we've come to one of those endings where this is the end, and we as the protagonists are leaving. We as the players get to leave, but there's still a whole lot there that's unresolved.
Hmm. I guess I didn't take it that way because I felt like because all these people came together, there was some resolution to them, and they just realized there's a few jerks that they need to put in jail.
Well, that's the thing about a few jerks. It's very rarely just a few.
That's true. So I guess that. Yeah, well, there is technically a secret ending to the game, but you have to beat the game 2 times and do some special stuff to actually see it, and that ending basically says no, they're happy at the end. So, but I don't have the patience to do that, so maybe some other time. But still, I loved Path of Radiance. I loved the system because Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. I just love there's a bunch of likable characters in that game, and it never a lot of them never felt like they were just here's a character trope. That's it. If they felt like they tried to kind of develop them a little bit more, like especially if like a lot of support conversations, because back in the day, not everyone could support with everybody, and the support conversations would really be reflective of the actual characters themselves. I always bring up Braum, who's my one of my favorite characters,
Oh yes.
because I like that he's a simple farmer and he joined the initial war to basically say, I just don't want people to impede on my land. I have 7 kids and a lovely wife, and I just want to go home after all of this. He's not doing this for any glory or anything. He's just trying to be nice, and just he wants to defend his country. And I like in Radiant Dawn that he comes back, and it's basically the same thing. He's just like, I'm still a simple farmer, but I'm going to stand up for people if I think people are being jerks. And I just kind of like that. Just, it's nice, simple things like that. It's not super in depth, but still enough that you get a huge sense of who this character is.
They all have in depth or just in touching on some motivation that brings them into the game. Why am I here? And some of them are admittedly less good than others, but that does help flesh out the story a lot.
And yeah, and the only reason I bring that up is because I'm going to compare it to some things in Fates later. That there's some things about characters in Fates that drive me nuts. So that's kind of why, because I feel like the fact that they all have some motivation that isn't just I'm here is good enough for me. But yeah, like in the system in that game too, since I can remember that one more vividly from compared to Blazing Blade, I like that you had the different shops, you could customize weapons, and you could even, that bonus experience thing was a huge, cool aspect that's unique to both those games. I don't think any other game has bonus experience like that. And I like I like that there was something in it that made it feel fresh, that wasn't just, here's another Fire Emblem game.
There was a lot to that game that changed it from previous games. That combined with a story that wasn't terrible, really helped to draw me and a bunch of other people in. And as you touched upon, the customization was cool. The bonus experience as a mechanic in general, I really like, because it allows you to play with your favorite characters without leaving everybody behind all the time. It helps to mitigate the Yagen problem. But then there was also the skill system, and this was my first introduction to the skill system, where you could equip custom skills onto your character with a certain point capacity, and that added a lot of depth and strategy to the character building, in combination with your custom abilities and your weapon triangles and all that. That really made it a fun game to play.
Yeah, and then in Radiant Dawn, I also like that they had the tier 3 classes. So you had like crazy, like, and they're all for the most part practical designs of these like armored, and it's just like, that's pretty nuts, because Braum with a cape, man, that's crazy. or Gatry, would take your pick. But yeah, I like that, and not to, yeah, I think the story was really great between both the games. I like that they connect with each other very well, and I also have to say that Blazing Blade had a terrible story, because I thought that was pretty good too on its own. I can't speak to Sacred Stones, so I'll have to take your word for that. But yeah, I would say if there's one thing I miss about Fire Emblem, it's those really nice kind of, they feel very grounded in their own world, and that was really nice about them. I didn't play Marth's DS game remake. I believe you have, though, haven't you?
I've played only a few parts of it, actually. You're talking about Shadow Dragon here?
Yep.
Yeah. I've played like the first 3 to 4 chapters of it, but I do not, in fact, own that game, so I own.
Oh, okay.
That was one that I skipped. That basically went direct from the GameCube and Wii versions to Fire Emblem Awakening.
And there's that game, which it's hard to talk about the game in some regards, because I don't hate it, but you can't dislike it either, because if Awakening failed, the Fire Emblem franchise would have died.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of a mixed bag for me as well. I liked a lot of the stuff that they were trying to do. The return of the skill system was very good. Bringing it back onto a portable system, the Nintendo 3DS. Firstly, that made it difficult for me to get my hands on, because I had to get the 3DS at that point.
I remember that.
Yeah, back then we were strapped for cash. That was a horrible time. Let's not talk about that anymore. But also, I don't know. I liked having it on the console. Like, I felt like there were better graphics, and that there was something nice about having it on the bigger screen. But putting just
Hmm.
those simple aesthetics aside, things I didn't much care for was the inclusion of the bonus maps and the DLC and the Nintendo downloadable content
Yeah,
being
and
thrown at you.
that's been a running thing through all the 3DS games. Even the most recent one is not exempt from that. But I have some good things to praise about the recent one, but I'll discuss that when we get to it.
Yeah, it's it's a nice feature for some people, and it definitely helps out um, the makers of the game. Obviously, it's a good way for them to make money in a
Hmm.
way that in Fates, or not in Fates, excuse me, in Awakening, I feel they did a good job of making it not necessary to participate in any of that. And I think that was a very good move on their part, but all the same, it felt very in your face, and it kind of broke the immersion, I feel.
And I think that's again when I think about when I was going back to the whole the story being grounded in the Tellius games, the GameCube and Wii one. That's kind of what I meant because a lot of the downloaded content map for Awakening were these maps where you would just get to recruits, and it was a custom character that they meant that they dressed up to look like them, an old Fire Emblem character. And the whole concept of it was you were going into their world to help them with something. And from a perspective of what they were trying to do, knowing this may be the last game in the series, I think that's a good, like, it's the last final hurrah. That's cool and all, but it does kind of break the immersion of it. And I think there's just some weird things, like plot wise, like why they even know that Martha's a thing for one reason, because it seems like this is supposed to be related to Marth's game, but it's not entirely. It's really weird.
There's not really a great explanation that I'm aware of for those. Um, I'm sure that they have some timeline or some plan in place there, but it's not one that I feel they really explored very well in the game. And it might, who knows, it might be something that they go into a little more in depth later, trying to tie all of these together into a cohesive storyline of some kind, but I don't have any answers on that regard.
Okay. Well, okay, I backtracking. There is one like key thing, and that's the character of Tiki because she was in Marth's game. So I guess that's like the one major connection. So it is technically speaking supposed to be a long distance sequel to Marth's games. But then with some of the bonus characters you can get, the fact that you can befriend literally everyone that you would have either potentially killed or killed off via story is really odd. But it's nice to have them as units. And then here's this random Ike guy that you just get, and I like him, but that raises a lot more questions that we just have this random Ike character here, other than Ike's popular. And I can attest to it. I like Ike, but at the same time, random.
On the one hand, I can almost excuse Ike, given the ending of the story of.
Okay. And yeah, to clarify, we're talking about the character of Priam or whatever. That character, that's the character that supposedly has relation to Ike as an ancestor.
But in general, like I like the accessibility of having those characters. It's a cool feature. I'm definitely glad that they implemented it, especially since they have the online functionality. But I feel like that's something that could have easily been put in at the end. Um,
Mm-hmm.
all those bonus
Well,
DLC characters at the end are for multiplayer only, instead of putting them
okay.
into the main game, which.
Well, technically speaking, they are at the end. You can't access those maps until you have the last chapter open of Awakening.
Right, but you can still
But
bring them in.
they still try to bring it into like the main story. So I
Yeah,
get what you mean from that.
there's a tie in there that smells funny to me.
Okay. So then, Awakening also introduced this system that, love or hate it, is the pair up system, which also leads into the actual pairing up of, hey, get together and make kids.
Yeah, there's you could talk for forever about this. As a mechanic in general, I don't hate it. It's kind of cool. It allows you to plot out and micromanage and optimize your units in a way that's satisfying. It has an explanation that for Awakening
For Awakening, it works. We get to
works pretty
Fates,
well.
then it's really dumb.
Uh, agreed. Um, and that if we hadn't had the other characters coming in and all this other stuff that we just talked about, I feel it would have been just fine. It was a little bit. For me, it was something that I did, but not something that I spent a lot of time intentionally going out of my way for, like other people did.
Yeah.
But I feel like
But
that was a good mechanic choice to explore
yeah.
at least the one time.
Because I know in Awakening I got all the kid characters. I didn't use many of them because I basically went, if I like you as a character or if you're my kid, sure. Otherwise, I don't really care as much because those are all optional units anyway. And for some of their chapters, it felt like you needed to be at a certain level, and then you kind of get them, and they're not really up to speed with where you are in the game. So it just doesn't really make sense to even bother with them at that point if you're just trying to play the game through the end.
Mm-hmm. Like you can get some cool characters and you can get some really good skill combinations out of them if you do it right. But then you spend an awful lot of time not playing the story so that
Yeah.
you can subsequently play the story.
Yeah, and then by the time you do get the story, because I know for me with like the grinding maps and whatnot, and the street pass feature, like I like the street pass feature in both Awakening and Fates, but the whole point of that then basically goes, who gives a flying crap about the actual story? Let's just grind to get the best units possible.
Mm-hmm. Which brings me to another point about that game. I don't know, maybe you'd like to weigh in on this, but it felt to me like the beginning of that game was good and challenging, and it felt like Fire Emblem. And then toward the end, it kind of felt very steamrolly and not in a way that was particularly satisfying.
Yeah, I guess I would kind of agree with you. I mean, I think I purposely tried to avoid getting units too over leveled in my first playthrough of it, but I think there was some interesting bits of challenge to it. It just didn't. I think for me, for how things worked and the mechanics and whatnot, the parrot mechanic in Awakening is actually kind of broken in my opinion. So if you just did that a lot, you basically could just beat any chapter you wanted, and there wasn't much to it. And I think the reason why I did it so often is because I just didn't care. And this drives me to one other point why I wanted to why we were talking about the Telus game so much. I felt like a lot of the characters in that game just didn't really do much. They just existed, and that was it. And I didn't really feel any strong connections to them, so that's why I just kind of went, you're paired up with this character. You're going to have a kid. Sure, great, whatever. Have fun. And I did like Robin, because Robin's your player avatar, and I kind of like, it all, well, he had his own dialogue. I did kind of relate to like the situation that he was in. I was like, I'm okay with this, but my gosh, if I'm gonna be honest, Crumb is a super boring protagonist. He is just standard stock. I'm the hero. The end. That's Crumb. That's all he is.
Yeah, it's been a bit, but I can't really contest that. I mean, I feel like at that point that's another design choice. I feel like that's another situation like we were talking about with Fire Emblem Radiance, where you've got the royalty or you've got the hero, but this game is actually really about you. They're just driving the story. So
And
they
I think
want
that's
they
what
want
makes it so weird, because in the final chapter, it's so about the story starts to revolve around you a lot as the game it gets to the climax, and for good reason as to why it revolves around your character. You cannot, if you want to, you cannot actually show up to the final battle. You can just be like, peace out. Crom has to show up, but you don't have to. And I'm just like, that doesn't make any sense. And so then, design-wise, I will give props to Fates, in which they just went, screw it, put the two together, and here's one character. You're just the main character. The end. Because Crom is meant to be the main character of Awakening, and he doesn't really feel like there's much to him other than, oh, that's my daughter from the future. Oh, you're my friend that I met because you have amnesia. That's it. I'm here. I got this tattoo on my arm. That's not a tattoo, it's a birthmark. Okay.
Yeah, I definitely get where you're going with that. At a certain point, though, it becomes to kind of backstep a little bit here. Um, there were an awful lot of characters and potential characters in that game, and there was also a lot of experience potential to be gained there. How do you, as a game developer, how would you walk the line where you want it to be challenging enough for the people who have played Fire Emblem before, who want a challenge, versus those who need some amount of extra, some optional grinding potential so they don't get permanently stuck?
And I think that's kind of the hard point. I think the idea of it was then is that they said, we have these new difficulties, just play those instead if you have an issue. Because casual mode was introduced in Awakening, and it was meant to appeal to a much wider audience, since they were really trying to drive home they wanted to not have this franchise die. And to their credit, they got to work that way. The only problem is that in some regard, we do feel kind of like there's this feel, from gameplay wise and story wise, I feel a little gypped because just kind of it takes the easy road because that's the most profitable road, as opposed to trying to stick to the older roots of it. But at the same time, if they had done that, would it actually be successful, and would the series have just died at that point? That's kind of the double-edged sword there.
Right. I mean, for me, something that I really enjoy in my video games in general, not necessarily just Fire Emblem, is I like to have a good, cohesive, immersive story.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel they did okay by kind of inserting you there as the tactician, as the avatar.
And I guess to backpedal just a little bit, to be fair, they did actually put you in as a tactician back in Blazing Blade. You didn't do anything, but you were there.
Right. But you, in this game, you got to interact in a way where, quote unquote, you took a very interactive role in the game itself. But I still didn't feel drawn to the storyline in this game particularly.
I think because I don't hate the story that much, but it's simple. There's nothing. It's not the in-depth story I liked about the Tellius games. It's not the convoluted mess that Fates is. It's just simple, and I think that's if that's your biggest gripe is that simple, then I think that's all right.
Yeah, and talking briefly about Fates in comparing of the two. Fates was all over the place and crazy, but if I had to choose which one drew me in, it was definitely Fates. I feel like Fates had a stronger allure as a story. Now, whether they lived up to that potential or not is a matter for debate, but I liked what they tried to do with Fates versus what they did with Awakening.
And I think Fates' potential is, we'll just get into Fates pretty much at this point. His potential was really great, and I feel those opening 6 chapters are actually pretty great. The problem is that after you beat one game, you can go to the other branching path, and you can just skip those 6 chapters and get thrown to something else, and it just kind of becomes, it's really odd. But I did like that because it did feel more like you were more in control of the story. You had the choice as to what was going on. Their explanations for things got a little convoluted, and the fact that some of the plot points you actually need to buy the DLC for to find out about is really dumb. So I'm not just talking about the other story modes. I'm talking about there's actually a prologue few chapters with some other characters that is legitimately canon to the rest of the game, and that is DLC that is separate from the rest of the games that you have to buy on your own, and it answers a few questions but raises many more, like many things that game did. And I think its world is a lot more interesting. I like the concept of Fates is really dang good. It's just unfortunate the execution is not as great. That's why for me, I'd actually probably go with Awakening more, just because, while it may not be as interesting as a concept, it's at least something that it knows what it is and it's straightforward about it.
Gut knee-jerk reaction here. I would agree. I enjoyed Awakening more than I enjoyed Fates. There were things about Fates that I really liked and that I appreciated them taking a stab at.
Mm-hmm. And the voice acting is really good too. So I mean, well, both of them have good voice acting, but there's a lot more cutscenes in Fates, and I think those all have emotional impact. And some of them are actually really good, depending on which game you play first. Some of them are not as good, but whatever. There's one character in Fates who I absolutely hate and I think is the worst character ever, so any cutscene with that particular character, I just go, I hate you, go away please.
I can hear the comments now screaming to know who this is.
Oh, they probably know who it is. You're gonna find out who it is too, because you're playing through Conquest.
Yes. As I said, I'm a wee bit behind the times.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so, and I guess to be fair, I don't hate Fates either. I enjoy it. It's just there's a lot of issues with it. And I think one thing for me that really stuck out, and as I noticed now that I've been playing through Echoes, Fates' first 6 chapters are all right, and then literally every chapter after that, until I think like chapter maybe 15 or so of of either story, is here's a character and 2 other characters. Here's more characters. Here's characters. Here's characters. Here's characters. Here's characters. Wait, why are you giving these to me? What's their? Well, these guys are your siblings and these are their retainers. I'm like, okay. Well, who are these 2 characters? I always want to give you 2 more characters because why not? And it's like, but why do I have these characters? There's no sense of reason as to why you're giving them. You're just here's more units, and then the fact that they brought the whole child mechanic thing back in a really dumb explanation as to why it even works in that game, because the whole plot convenience of it is just like, if we just have a gosh darn hyperbolic time chamber from Dragon Ball Z, why don't we all just go in it, train there, and come out and kick some butt? No, just keep the babies in there. That's what we're going to use them for. What?
Yeah, that was quirky. That was not well thought out, personally, in my opinion.
I feel like it was something popular in Awakening and they just wanted to keep it because it was popular, but I felt like if they had nixed it entirely, they would have had more time to focus on some other things to develop the game a little more. It felt like they were trying to be ambitious, but also throwing everything everyone liked about the previous game because of the sales.
I do feel like it was a bit of a shoe-in because of the relatively positive reaction that Awakening had. It just felt like this is too good to not reuse. Let's reuse it. And then it just didn't work.
I felt like, because when I heard it was going to be in the game, I was thinking like, oh, cool. Maybe you have to build relationships to a certain point, then a time skip will happen, and then you get kids. So if you didn't build the relationships before a certain point, you don't get kids. But the other thing, I guess, was more accessible in some regards, but was also just... I was kind of upset that my initial thoughts were not how it worked out.
It's Stranger's suspension of disbelief.
Yep. And that's saying a lot because other parts of the story would talk about things. You go to a place and you can't say its name when you leave the place, or otherwise you disappear. There's some really, as my one friend pointed out as she was playing it, it borders, if not becomes, very similar to plot threads from Kingdom Hearts. And I am not to disagree with that, because they do kind of get trolly and pulling stuff out of their buddy about how things work in those particular games.
Yeah, there's a lot of things about that game story that felt contrived.
Yeah. And I feel bad because, for the most part, I do actually like some of, at least the sibling characters, except one. I do like a lot of those characters. You're laughing? Do you know who it is?
Oh, I have my suspicions, but I'm not sure yet.
I played Conquest first, just to let you know. I like all the siblings in Conquest.
Uh-huh.
But those, I like them, and I felt like I felt bad because I felt like there could have been more development for them, and there's some brutal things that happen to some of them in some of the games, and some of those cutscenes are emotional just from the performance alone, but some of them also just have no payoff because you kind of go, why do I care? Because they never gave you enough reason to care.
And that's... I feel like, and this is kind of odd to say, because it's cool they tried to do with the diverging storylines, but if they'd have picked one and focused on that one and given that one more chapters and more time and more story, that it would have been better. Because, especially playing through Conquest, I feel like there's a certain point where it's like, all right, we've hit video game trope. Everything is awful. It's time for us to rebel and do something about it. It's time for us to become the hero. And then
Mm-hmm.
that just never happens.
And I think because there's technically a third story too. I think if they had just stuck to two of them and kept them as kind of like these opposite yin and yang thing, and I get the reason why a third exists because the third is well, no, let's get all the characters together now, the, except for a few for some reason. That's actually kind of odd, but they still want to get most of the characters together so you can all diverge against the one evil bad thing, and it's like okay, that's fine, but it's still odd, and how they even unify up takes a while, and is also just super odd padding wise.
And I like the way they tried to distinguish the two characters. Not they took great pains not to make it a battle between good and evil.
Yeah, they know
Which
they I that's again, those opening 6 chapters are really great because it shows these sibling characters, except one, are all really decent people, and they're just on two different sides of the war, and that's why I was so hopeful about it because it brought me back to Radiant Dawn because you had those two warring armies where neither side was technically wrong, they were just against each other.
and I but I feel that they did a substantially worse job in Fates than they did like in the
Oh no, no, definitely, because eventually they have to out that one side is actually wrong.
well, yeah, it felt less like a battle between good and evil and more like a battle between good versus also good but dumb.
Yeah, or I'm gonna pick favorites. The game. That. But yeah, so I know I haven't been Fates yet, so I won't try to go because I know we've basically just been talking through the games. I had some other things to say like what's your favorite character and all that kind of stuff, but I know we're already getting close to an hour here, so my apologies. But I know we just kind of talked through the games, and I know you haven't been Fates yet, so we'll kind of drop that. But I will just at least say right now, Echoes is phenomenal. Like every complaint I have about Fates, gone. It's just kind of crazy. And I know that Echoes is technically a remake of an old Famicom game that apparently didn't do well initially because it was like the Zelda 2 of the series where it was way too different and people didn't like that, but people are okay with it now. No player created avatar, so there's no crap about that. It can just focus on the characters as they are. And the one thing I've loved is that I'm only in the second act of it right now, but in the first act, there's only about 11 characters. They all join you for their own particular reasons, and you can even deny them joining you if you want to just focus on the other ones. There is some of that grindy stuff in it, and I'm okay with it because they make it work. They have like this dungeon crawling aspect to it, and it's really cool. But one thing I just kind of noticed about it is that they really give time for these characters to kind of understand each other and develop, and it's not just who's the best waifu.
Well, that sounds like a glowing endorsement.
Yeah, for the most part, I'm in the middle of Act 2. I'm not sure where the game is going to go, but I'm very curious and excited because it just seems like there's more gravitas to it. And one thing like to say is that when I'm looking at the actual like in-game character models in battle, like the way they did it is crazy because in Awakening and Fates it was just here's some kind of 3D-ish models and they fight each other. But in Echoes, like if you get into a battle, it's super cinematic. It starts you from the back of your character as they run up, pull out their weapon or whatever, strike the enemy, the camera pans around them, does like this crazy stuff, and you look at the character models and I go, wow, that looks like that could have been ripped directly from Radiant Dawn. It looks that gosh darn good.
I was going to comment and then just kind of lost a thread. Starting in Awakening, but really developing in Fates, the games really started to feel a lot more polished, and I think that
Mm-hmm.
could easily just have to do with the advancement of the technology. But
Yep.
it started to feel like that console game in a handhold,
Yep.
actually.
And that's why I've enjoyed a lot about it so far, Echoes. And I'm kind of excited to see where that's going to go. And I'm going to be playing it after we're done recording this. So, but then I guess just kind of just bring it up. So I know I've mentioned Ike and Braum. Those are my favorite characters. And I might find some favorite characters in Echoes. And I did like some characters in Fates and Awakening. Or mostly Fates now that I think about it, because Awakening I have a hard time, other than I like Robin, but Robin's me, so that's just me being self-indulgent. um, I did like Ryoma and Xander, for instance, in Fates. Those guys are cool. But who would you say your favorite characters are, based on the games you've played?
Uh, well, that's a bit of a loaded question insofar as basically every one of my favorite characters is going to come out of my favorite games, which is going to be the console games.
Okay.
Um, Having said that, there's a whole bunch of characters that I really like, but probably the two favorite characters from that series were Soren and Leith.
Okay. I should have known about Leif. I don't know why I didn't know about her.
Oh, yeah, we spent an awful lot of time grinding experience and weapon experience for her, or
Mm-hmm.
at least I did in our last playthrough. But yeah, the transform mechanic of the Laguz units was really fun because it really rewarded you for plotting out your actions, and your units were substantially stronger than the other units, but only for a limited time,
Mm-hmm.
which required a certain level of micromanagement I really enjoyed. And Lathe and the other cat morphs especially because they had super large mobility range, which allowed for some very interesting and incredibly dangerous tactics that I know gave you a heart attack at least a couple of times.
Probably.
And then Soren, I don't know what it was about him, but he was just super, super great. He
He's
was
a
ridiculously powerful.
he's a snarky little POS, but he has every reason to be, and you learn more about his like entire backstory, which this is why I feel like Path of Radiance was meant to be a two-parter, because Soren as a character, as you learn who he actually is, that not even he really realizes it, but as you as the player learn that, you kind of go, holy crap, this character.
Yeah, I think he does realize it. At the very least, in the second game,
Okay.
he drops some illusions, specifically when he's talking with gosh, name completely eludes me. But with Peleus and some of the other characters, he
Okay.
drops a couple of hints about that. But no, yeah, he just seemed smart and practical, and he was really really weak when you started out with him. But if you took the time to raise him up, he just became a horrible
Oh,
monster.
yep. He murders everything. The other question I had on here was favorite gameplay style, and I think it's obvious at this point based on what we said. We definitely preferred the Telia style over the at least Awakening and Fate style. Echoes is a bit of a different beast. I'm kind of curious to see how you're going to like that, because based on what you're describing to me, it sounds like it's kind of similar to Sacred Stones.
Well, it'll be a nice change of pace when I get back to playing something that's not Heroes, and I can finally have mobility back as a strategy.
And actually, I'm curious. I did not know you played Heroes.
I do. I've played it for a while now.
I
I
gotta add you on that. I have Ike. I love Ike because he is my Takumi Slayer. Because spoilers, I hate Takumi. There you go. It's on the open now. I've not been really blatantly quiet about it. I don't like him. Period. I don't like him as a character, and I especially don't like him in Heroes because screw the stupid crap that he can attack you at point blank.
Yeah. Well, then there's others that have the opposite of that. The Ryomas and especially the Hectors of the world. It's going to be nice to be able to have strong counters to Hector again. Gosh, I hated playing against that guy.
But yeah, so like thinking about that then, because like Heroes, I just enjoy it as a mobile game because it's not in your face, buy money from us. It's just it kind of just lets you do your own thing with it. And I really like that about it.
They were surprisingly generous with a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
stuff that comes from Heroes. Um, I mean, it's not a Fire Emblem game, but as far as mobile games go, it's much above any of the other
Yeah,
mobile games I've played.
it's a good mobile version of Fire Emblem. I would say it's not Fire Emblem as it should be, but it's a good. If you were to translate it into a mobile game that you play in small settings, I think it's a pretty good representation.
It's more complex than I expected, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just complex and just fun enough to keep you going. But it's nothing that I ever had any problem putting down.
Yep. And so, going from that, are you looking forward to any future releases? Obviously, you still have to beat Fates, and there's Echoes out now, but there's talk of a game that's going to be on the Switch, and they also are going to be making a Warriors game for some reason that they've only shown Crom off in so far, but that's going to be a thing too. Are you looking forward to future Fire Emblem releases?
I'm looking forward to the one that's going to hypothetically come out on the Switch.
Okay.
Because it's going to be back on a quote-unquote console.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be
Well,
interesting to
the
see
Switch is a console. It just has the ability to be portable.
right. And in that case, in that way, it kind of bridges the gap between the two.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll be interested to see what they do with that. I'm really cautiously optimistic about that.
I feel like I still need to beat it, but I feel like if you played Echoes for a few hours, you would probably feel a lot. You'd probably breathe a sigh of relief after everything that went on in Fates.
I'm looking forward to it. It's definitely one I'm looking to pick up here once life stops being a little busy.
Mm-hmm. And luckily, E3 is right around the corner, so maybe we'll get to see what that Fire Emblem game is. And who knows?
Gosh.
Maybe it might be another remake. And like the word I keep hearing people buzz about is that Echoes itself was a pretty good remake of Gaiden, which is the second game that was only released in Japan that we never got since it was for the Famicom. But people have been speculating a cool idea, and I actually fully support this because I thought this would be a cool idea a long time ago, is remaking Elliewood's game, but also Roy's game together as one big adventure.
That would be kind of cool. Whatever it is, I'm going against the grain here. I hope that we don't see it at E3, because regardless of what it is, if we see it there, I'm going to be getting on the hype train. And it's going to take way too long for that to roll into the station.
Okay, so when's your birthday? I can get you a Switch. Don't worry. Here you go. Here you go. Here's the methods to play it. Have fun.
As for Fire Emblem Warriors, I'm cautiously pessimistic about that. I feel like that has the potential maybe to be a good game, but I don't think it's going to be a Fire Emblem game.
So I'm gonna speak to that just really quickly because I have some really awful opinions on that in general. I played Hyrule Warriors. Hyrule Warriors is a Dynasty Warriors game that they put Zelda characters in, and they
trying not to draw that comparison, but yeah.
What?
I said I was trying not to draw that.
The reason I bring it up because there's actually a good example of how to do this, because that game is Dynasty Warriors, and they put Zelda characters in it, and they didn't really give a crap about the Zelda lore whatsoever. They just went, what's popular, that's it. And just from the trailer showing Crom alone, Crom's popular, despite the fact I think he's kind of boring. Yeah, I don't... I feel like that's gonna have the same effect, unfortunately. On the flip side, another game I've been playing, Dragon Quest Heroes and Dragon Quest Heroes 2, it's still a Dynasty Warriors game in terms of gameplay, but it's a game that really gives a crap about the series lore that it's using. It really actually explores the characters, again, in kind of a different method, and with the second game, it actually basically becomes more of an RPG than a Dynasty Warriors game, which reflects the fact that Dragon Quest is actually an RPG. So I feel like there is a right way to do it, I just don't know if they're actually going to have the balls to do it in the correct way.
Right.
Oh yeah, there's also that hashtag FE game thing. I never played it, but I know it exists.
Haven't heard of that.
Oh, you haven't? It's that weird. It's the game that was done by Atlas. So it's like this fusion of Persona and Fire Emblem. Basically, it's Persona, and their personas are Fire Emblem characters. That's my understanding of it, at least.
Yeah, I do remember hearing about that back when it was in development, and I didn't hear a single thing about it after it came out. So
yeah, it came out last year. It was, from my understanding, it was fine. They didn't dub any of it, so it's all in Japanese, which some people are okay with, and I don't know. I think there is this really big vocal part of people that I see a lot where they get super upset about anything that's changed to original Japanese, and I don't understand that because you're playing in English anyway, so why do you care? But whatever. But the only thing I know about that particular hashtag FE game is the like the final boss song right before it, where they basically just do a pop idol song version of the Fire Emblem main theme. I'll show it to you afterwards. It's just really weird. I don't know what they were thinking, what they were doing, but I heard it's a pretty decent game for what it is. So I haven't played it, but that's kind of where I get into like I draw the line of like, is this really Fire Emblem? Because again, like Fire Emblem Warriors, like it's gonna have Fire Emblem characters in it, but does it really reflect the series as a whole?
And yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Time will tell.
Okay, so then I guess just to wrap it all up, we mentioned favorite characters now, so I guess just it should be obvious, but I just want to hear it. What's your favorite game in the series?
Oh,
Oh, it's actually a tough question. Okay.
it is. I mean, mostly it comes down to whether I like Path of Radiance more versus Radiant Dawn. But honestly,
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there, and I'm just going to say you get cheats. They count as one game. They're both continuing the same story. They're one game together. I don't care. So you can say both.
you can say that all you want, but there were a number of differences, especially in the gameplay mechanics of the way that the Laguz units and the bonus experience systems were treated. So I get to treat them as two different games.
Okay.
Um, but I think ultimately probably I liked Radiant Dawn just a smidge better, not by much. Having said that, though, the Sacred Stones, honestly, very, very close third. I spent a whole bunch of time playing that game, and I would still go back and I would replay it to this day.
Okay, so let's... At some point, I should probably play Sacred Stones. I don't know if I'm going to enjoy it, but it sounds like it's a game I should play. But that's why I'm curious if you play Echoes. And if you say it's similar to this, I'm going to be like, well, I have Echoes, so I don't need to play Sacred Stones. So I'm terrible like that. But don't worry, everybody. In the voting gauntlet, that one time in Heroes, I was on Team of Frame. I know we lost, but I try to fight for all of you guys.
So, what's your number one favorite here? What do you think?
It's Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. I mean,
Okay.
Echo. I'm still in the middle of Echoes, and if it can surprise me enough, then I might give it a pass. But I don't know. I just really like a lot of the characters, and I like that entire world and in the Tellius area. So I just again, I lose myself in that world a lot. I just really enjoy it.
Well, that is fair.
Alright, so that's pretty much it as far as Fire Emblem talk goes. At this current point, I'm going to answer any questions left on the last video, so everyone who is listening out there, and I've been talking for a while, but if you want to leave any questions for myself or for Anketh, not that he'll be on every one of these, but if you want to leave a question for him, that's perfectly fine as well. You can leave them in the comments below of this video. And from the last video, I was going over the 25th anniversary of Kirby, and I have two questions here, and the first one that's going to get out of the way is, are you going to upload Kirby Planet Robot True Arena soon? Yes. Short answer is yes. Long answer is soon. It's longer by one letter.
One letter.
And the other question I have is Kirby's Dream Land 2 your favorite Kirby game? P.S. Mine is Kirby 64 from Red Mario 7. To answer your question, Red Mario 7, my favorite Kirby game is actually Kirby Planet Robot currently. Kirby's Dream Land 2 has a lot of nostalgic value for me and was my favorite Kirby game for a long time. But with the recent advent of Triple Deluxe and now Planet Robot, I've kind of just gone, the sky's the limit. The Kirby series is awesome, and Planet Robot is definitely the crowning achievement of that series until it gets outdone again, which I'm sure they're going to do. Not that you've played many of them, Anketh, but do you have a favorite Kirby game?
I've played a couple of different Kirby games, not nearly to the same extent that you have.
Well, I've played all of them, so...
I still have a soft spot for Kirby Superstar and its subsequent remakes. I really enjoyed the power system in that game and just the random wonkiness of all of the different adventures from that one.
You make me so happy with that answer, because the remake of Kirby Superstar is one of my favorite remakes of all times. That's also the first debut of that particular director who's now directed all of the recent Kirby games, including Kirby Planet Robot. He's a fantastic director. And I also appreciate the answer because it's not the stock answer I usually get of Kirby 64. So, yes, thank you.
Happy to help.
Well, then, that is all the time we have. Sorry this went on for quite a while, and sorry for taking so much of your time, Anketh, but thanks for having me on. I know we just kind of talked about all the English Fire Emblem games. I don't think you've not played any of the Japanese ones, I take it, correct?
Very briefly, I started getting into them, but the language barrier was an issue.
Okay, I mean, that is prone to happen. And I can't really speak to many of the Japanese ones myself because I know Japanese, but not to that well enough an extent to really appreciate them in that regard. And I don't know, I feel like there is something that's kind of usually lost either in translation or if you're just playing it in a different language that is more catered to that particular region that might not resonate with you as well. So if they ever remake another game and bring it to the stateside, I'll probably try to play that as well. Sorry, Marth, I didn't play your game, but I heard it was kind of boring. So, I mean, you only played 4 chapters of it, and you seem to just kind of give up on it. So I'm gonna take that as it kind of gets boring.
Ouch.
I am awful. I'm sorry, but Marth seems like a pretty nice character overall.
I was intrigued by some of the mechanics, but that's a different discussion for another day.
Otherwise, so now that we've probably upset everyone, don't worry if you're upset by this, it's okay, and I apologize for everything. At least I can apologize for myself. If Anketh wants to say whatever he wants and doesn't want to apologize, he's totally right. He is totally in right mind to say that as well. But I think we're going to end it off here, and thank you very much for joining me, Anketh, and thank you everyone for listening. Again, if you want to leave a comment below, either to Fire Emblem or E3 is coming up, and I think I will be doing another one of these right before E3 with a different co-host, and we'll be discussing E3 predictions. If you want to leave any questions about that, go right ahead. So, hope you all have a wonderfully great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, ciao, and thank you again, Anketh.
Thank you.